I accidentally injected my boss with morphine. Then he told me not to panic and explained what we'd do next. What happened after shocked me. I realized something was wrong the second the syringe felt heavier than it should have. Not physically heavier, just wrong, like when your stomach drops before your brain catches up. I remember thinking, don't panic, check again. But by the time I looked down at the vial, it was already too late. I'm a nurse. I've given thousands of injections. I've memorized dosages the way other people memorize song lyrics. That night was supposed to be routine, almost ceremonial even, because it was his birthday. 85 years old, wealthy, sharp-minded, still stubborn enough to argue with doctors and nurses half his age. The kind of patient who makes you double-check everything because he will notice if you don't. And yet somehow I had just injected him with morphine. Not the antibiotic. Morphine, 100 milligrams. My hands went cold first, then my mouth. I couldn't hear anything except my own pulse, loud and uneven, like it was echoing inside my ears. My training kicked in a split second later, numbers flashing through my head like warning signs. 3 milligrams. That was the prescription. And for something this pure, 5 milligrams could kill. I felt my knees weaken, and I had to grip the edge of the bedside table to stay upright. I must have looked like I was about to faint, because he noticed immediately. He always noticed everything. Hey, the old man said gently, his voice calm in a way that felt almost cruel. Don't look like that. You'll scare yourself to death before the drug does anything. I stared at him, horrified, not just by what I'd done, but by how peaceful he looked. Too peaceful. Like he already knew something I didn't. I made a mistake, I whispered. My throat felt tight. Sir, I gave you the wrong medication. Morphine, he said, finishing my sentence for me. I froze. How did you? You nurses label things carefully, he said. And you just checked the vial 3 times like you were hoping it would change its mind. He smiled faintly, then added, as long as you give me the antidote within 10 minutes, I'll be fine. The body will metabolize the rest. No need to panic. 10 minutes. That word echoed in my head like a ticking clock. I turned toward the medical kit immediately, my hands shaking as I opened it, already reaching for the naloxone. And then I stopped. The slot was empty. I stared at it, blinked, and stared again, like that might make it appear. I checked the side pouch, the bottom compartment. I dumped half the contents onto the bed, my movements growing frantic. Nothing. The antidote was gone. My chest tightened so suddenly I couldn't breathe. No. I knew I had checked that kit earlier that evening. I was obsessive about it. I had to be. This wasn't a public hospital. This was a private manor, far from the city. With limited staff and long response times, I felt sick. The old man watched me quietly. Too quietly. Someone like him, someone that rich, usually lived surrounded by people, security, doctors on call. But this place was different. Isolated. Intentional. Even if I called for help right now, an ambulance wouldn't make it here in time. And then it hit me. This wasn't just an accident. He sighed softly, almost disappointed. So, he said, they finally decided to use someone else's hands. I looked up at him, my eyes burning. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over and picked up the small notebook he always kept beside his bed. The same black notebook he used for plot ideas, character sketches, unfinished endings. He flipped it open slowly, like he was savoring the moment. You know, he said thoughtfully, this is actually a very interesting way to kill someone. My stomach twisted. Please don't joke right now. I'm not joking, he said. I'm impressed. That's when I really started to panic. Because he wasn't scared. I was terrified, shaking, barely holding myself together. And he was calm, observant, already analyzing the situation like one of his stories. Someone wanted him dead. And they wanted me to take the fall. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands. I'm calling for help, I said. I don't care how long it takes. Before I could dial, he reached out and pressed the screen dark. Listen to me, he said firmly. Every word matters now. I looked at him, tears threatening to spill over. Sir, if you panic, he continued, you'll destroy your own life, and not just yours. My heart sank. You told me once, he said quietly, that your mother doesn't have legal status. I felt like I'd been slapped. If the police decide this was negligence, he went on, they'll investigate you, thoroughly, and once they do, your family will be dragged into it. Your mother will be exposed. Your family will fall apart. I couldn't even speak. My lips trembled as I stared at him, the weight of what he was saying pressing down on me. I won't let that happen, he said, but you have to do exactly what I tell you. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Midnight was approaching. First, he said, you will go downstairs. Make noise. Don't sneak. Let people hear you. And when you reach the door, You'll greet my youngest son. He smokes at exactly midnight every night. He'll see you leave. I shook my head. But what about you? He smiled, faint and unreadable. I'll take care of the rest. Something about that smile made my chest ache. It's midnight now, he said, glancing at the clock. Time matters. I don't remember walking downstairs. My body moved on instinct, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. I made sure my footsteps were loud, too loud. I said goodnight to the staff I passed, forcing my voice to sound normal. When I reached the front door, his youngest son was there, just like he said, cigarette in hand. Heading out already? He asked casually. Yes, I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Good night. I got into the car and drove out of the manor, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt. Once I passed beyond the surveillance zone, my phone buzzed. Pull over, his message said. I parked by the roadside, my heart pounding, and read the next instructions carefully. Return through the backyard gate. The dog knows you. He won't bark. Avoid everyone. Climb to the third floor using the exterior ladder. I hesitated. Then I turned the car around. The backyard was dark, quiet except for the rustling of trees. Just like he said, the dog didn't make a sound, just wagged its tail briefly before disappearing back into the shadows. Climbing was harder than I expected. My hand slipped once and my breath came out in short gasps. When one of the metal bars snapped under my weight, the sound felt impossibly loud. I froze, waiting for someone to shout. No one did. When I finally made it back inside, he was waiting for me. Put these on, he said, handing me his pajamas and hat. My youngest son will think you're me. My hands shook as I changed. I have one more thing to tell you, he added. You throw up when you lie. I stiffened. So don't lie, he said. Just don't tell the whole truth. When I left again, retracing my steps, my legs felt weak. On the way down, I ran into his great-grandmother. She squinted at me, confused, and asked why I'd come back so late. I mumbled something, my heart in my throat. She smiled kindly. Don't stay up too late, she said, mistaking me for her great-grandson. I went home shaking. The next morning, they found him dead. His throat was slit. A bloody knife lay on the floor. The newspapers exploded. A legendary mystery novelist found dead in his study. The police called it suicide. I didn't sleep for days. Every knock at the door made my heart race. Every phone call made me nauseous. I went to work like nothing was wrong, smiled when spoken to, nodded when asked questions, but inside, I was unraveling. Then the call came. They said he had already been buried, but the police wanted to question everyone again. They wanted me back at the manor, early. That's when everything truly began to fall apart. And that's when I realized this story, his story, was far from over. I knew they were going to call me back before the phone ever rang. That kind of fear doesn't leave you all at once. It settles into your bones and stays there, quiet, patient, waiting. When the call finally came, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, still wearing my work scrubs even though my shift had ended hours ago. I hadn't had the energy to change. The voice on the other end was polite, almost apologetic. They told me the old man had already been buried. Then they said the police still needed to ask a few more questions, and that I should return to the manor early the next morning as usual. They said it like it was nothing. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time, my mind going blank and then flooding all at once. Buried. The word felt heavy. Final. Whatever answers I was hoping to get from him were gone forever. That was when I understood something else too. This wasn't over, it was just changing shape. When I arrived at the manor the next day, the air felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just tense, like the house itself was holding its breath. Everyone was there. Too many people. Family members who normally came and went now stayed put, sitting stiffly in the living room like they were afraid to leave their seats. The police were already inside. I kept my head down and walked in quietly, just like I always did. Nurse first, observer second, suspect third. They started with introductions, as if this were some formal gathering instead of the aftermath of a death. That's when I really saw them. Not as a family, but as individuals. The eldest daughter sat straight-backed on the sofa, hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked composed, confident, the kind of woman who had built herself from nothing and never let anyone forget it. In the old man's eyes, she had always been the most capable. I knew that because he told me, more than once, usually with a tired smile. Her husband sat beside her, leaning back too comfortably, like the room belonged to him. Everyone knew he'd married into money. Everyone knew it bothered him. They also knew better than to say it out loud. Their son, big, broad-shouldered, athletic, stood near the window scrolling through his phone, completely detached from the tension in the room. Jeff wasn't there. The eldest daughter explained it quickly, almost offensively. It had been the old man's 85th birthday that night, she said. A family dinner, nothing unusual. Jeff had left early before things wrapped up. She said it casually, but I noticed how her eyes flicked toward the door when she said his name. Then there was the younger son, the one who ran the publishing company. On paper, he looked like the golden child. Best-selling books, 80 million copies a year. Everyone assumed the father valued him the most. But the old man never spoke about him with pride, only disappointment. The younger son sat close to his own boy, a teenager who was permanently glued to his phone, posting things online that made everyone uncomfortable, but no one confronted directly. The son claimed that the three of them had celebrated the birthday together. Nothing unpleasant happened, everything was normal. Normal. That word did a lot of work in that room. Then there was the widow, the wife of the eldest son who had died years ago. She sat quietly with her daughter beside her, hands clasped tightly. The old man had paid for everything for them. Living expenses, school fees. They had no financial pressure at all. At least that's what everyone thought. The police listened, took notes, asked gentle questions. Then something shifted. The younger son suddenly leaned forward and asked almost sharply, "If my father committed suicide, why are we being questioned like murder suspects?" The room went silent. I felt my heart jump. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. That's when they brought him in. Nick. He stood behind the police, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the situation at all. He introduced himself simply. Retired intelligence, private detective now. He said he'd been hired by an anonymous client and was obligated to be present. When someone asked who hired him, he shook his head. He didn't know, only that he was paid very well. I didn't like the way he looked at people. Not directly, not aggressively. He watched the space between them, the pauses, the reactions that came half a second too late. At first, the family seemed united, polite, reasonable. That didn't last. Nick asked questions that sounded harmless but landed like stones. The son-in-law, the gold digger, was the first to crack. He accused the younger son of fighting with the old man that night. His voice was too loud, too quick. The younger son denied it immediately. Then, under pressure, the truth came out in pieces. He had no talent for business. Everyone knew it, especially his father. He'd wanted to exploit the copyrights, turn novels into films, squeeze more money out of old stories. The old man had said no, said he lacked creativity, said he'd done nothing but live off his name. He'd been fired, quietly, told to come to the office the next day to discuss the details. Still, the younger son insisted there had been no argument that night. Just talk about a new book, nothing more. Then he shifted the blame. Jeff, he said, was the real problem. Jeff didn't work. Jeff argued with his grandfather that night. Everyone saw it. Jeff stormed out of the study. All eyes turned to the son-in-law. He shrugged awkwardly and said Jeff wasn't there today, so he couldn't confirm anything. Nick changed direction without warning. He mentioned hearing that Jeff wasn't the only one who argued with the old man that night. Someone else had been yelling too. The younger son sat close to his own boy, a teenager who was permanently glued to his phone, posting things online that made everyone uncomfortable, but no one confronted directly. The son claimed that the three of them had celebrated the birthday together. Nothing unpleasant happened, everything was normal. Normal. That word did a lot of work in that room. Then there was the widow, the wife of the eldest son who had died years ago. She sat quietly with her daughter beside her, hands clasped tightly. The old man had paid for everything for them. Living expenses, school fees. They had no financial pressure at all. At least that's what everyone thought. The police listened, took notes, asked gentle questions. Then something shifted. The younger son suddenly leaned forward and asked almost sharply, "If my father committed suicide, why are we being questioned like murder suspects?" The room went silent. I felt my heart jump. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. That's when they brought him in. Nick. He stood behind the police, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the situation at all. He introduced himself simply. Retired intelligence, private detective now. He said he'd been hired by an anonymous client and was obligated to be present. When someone asked who hired him, he shook his head. He didn't know, only that he was paid very well. I didn't like the way he looked at people. Not directly, not aggressively. He watched the space between them, the pauses, the reactions that came half a second too late. At first, the family seemed united, polite, reasonable. That didn't last. Nick asked questions that sounded harmless but landed like stones. The son-in-law, the gold digger, was the first to crack. He accused the younger son of fighting with the old man that night. His voice was too loud, too quick. The younger son denied it immediately. Then, under pressure, the truth came out in pieces. He had no talent for business. Everyone knew it, especially his father. He'd wanted to exploit the copyrights, turn novels into films, squeeze more money out of old stories. The old man had said no, said he lacked creativity, said he'd done nothing but live off his name. He'd been fired, quietly, told to come to the office the next day to discuss the details. Still, the younger son insisted there had been no argument that night. Just talk about a new book, nothing more. Then he shifted the blame. Jeff, he said, was the real problem. Jeff didn't work. Jeff argued with his grandfather that night. Everyone saw it. Jeff stormed out of the study. All eyes turned to the son-in-law. He shrugged awkwardly and said Jeff wasn't there today, so he couldn't confirm anything. Nick changed direction without warning. He mentioned hearing that Jeff wasn't the only one who argued with the old man that night. Someone else had been yelling too. And that was when I realized something terrifying. Even if I survived this house would never let me go. And the story was only just beginning. Nick showed up again that night. Not loud wrong, not dramatic wrong. Just that quiet, skin-tight feeling like I'd stepped into a room where the air had already been used up. He didn't knock the way people normally do. He stood there, waited, then tapped twice, slow, deliberate, like he already knew I was awake. "I need you to guide me," he said once I opened the door. Not help, not answer questions. Guide. That word stuck to me the whole night. The next morning, we went back to the manor with the police to review the surveillance. I told myself to breathe normally. I told myself that if I acted calm, my body would follow. It didn't. That was when I realized something that made my stomach drop. I had parked in the wrong place. The old man had been very specific that night. In front of the statue, he'd said. I remembered the way he pointed his cane, the small impatience in his voice. But I'd parked behind it instead. Just a few meters off, but enough. Behind it was where the camera could see. If that footage played, everything I'd buried would surface. I felt the pressure build behind my eyes, the way it always did when panic came quietly instead of all at once. I was already rehearsing excuses in my head when the recorder started making a strange sound. A soft crackle, then smoke. The equipment was old. Too old. The officers cursed under their breath and decided to take it back to the station. Everyone was focused on the machine. No one noticed my hands. No one noticed the magnet. I don't even remember deciding to do it. My body moved before my thoughts caught up, slipping it against the tape with the same steady precision I used to draw injections. When you're trained to keep patients alive, your hands learn things your conscience sometimes can't keep up with. Nick was walking the outer wall when I saw my footprints. Still there. Pressed deep into the mud from that night. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. If they saw those prints, they wouldn't need the tape. They wouldn't need anything else. Nick suddenly told everyone to stop moving. I kept walking. I pretended I didn't hear him, stepped past the wooden gate, then turned back casually, too casually, and scuffed the ground with my shoe. Once, twice, enough to blur the edges, enough to make it look like nothing. Nick's eyes lingered on me for half a second longer than necessary. That was when I knew he was already watching. When they checked behind the villa, the dog came running back with a piece of wood in its mouth. I swear my heart stopped. I recognized it immediately, the board I'd broken that night. I didn't think. I just moved, took it, laughed softly like it was nothing, and tossed it into the woods. The sound it made landing among the leaves felt louder than it should have. Then Jeff appeared. It was the day of the will reading. And suddenly, the dead man didn't matter anymore. They treated Jeff like a stain on the carpet, like someone who had the nerve to show up uninvited. They mocked him for missing the funeral, for daring to care about inheritance after everything. His father defended him. Jeff didn't bother defending himself. Then his cousin dropped the bomb. He said he'd been in the bathroom that night. Said he'd heard Jeff arguing with Grandpa through the vent, yelling, threats, a warning. That was when the room shifted. Jeff didn't deny it. He admitted Grandpa had kicked him out of the will. And just like that, the mood flipped. Suddenly, Jeff wasn't competition anymore. They started patting his shoulder, telling him maybe it was for the best. Maybe Grandpa wanted him to grow up. Watching them change like that made my skin crawl. Jeff snapped. He cursed everyone, his parents, his cousins, the whole room. The lawyer arrived just in time to stop it from turning into something worse. Nick and I left before the reading started. Neither of us wanted to see it. The dog found us again. This time it wasn't playful. It came running with another piece of wood and Nick stopped dead. Inside the house, even though everything had been cleaned, there were still traces. Dirt ground into the carpet, faint marks on the window frame. Nick said quietly, "Someone didn't want to use the stairs. Someone had climbed." Mike stopped the will reading and demanded no one leave the city until the case was solved. Then the lawyer continued. And that was when the world tipped sideways. No one inherited anything, except me. The room went silent. Jeff laughed. I wanted to disappear. The room went completely still when my name was read. Not quiet in a respectful way. Quiet like everyone was calculating something at the same time. I didn't hear the rest of the lawyer's sentence. I just heard the blood rushing in my ears and the scrape of a chair somewhere behind me. Then Jeff laughed. Once, sharp and surprised, and that sound snapped everything back into focus. He was the only one who looked relieved. Everyone else stared at me like I'd just confessed to something. I remember thinking, this can't be right. Not because I didn't believe the old man was capable of it, but because I knew what I'd done, or what I thought I'd done, and people like me didn't get rewarded. We got buried under paperwork and silence. The accusations started immediately. Quiet at first, side glances, whispers, then louder. Questions about authenticity, about manipulation, about how convenient it was that the nurse ended up with everything. I didn't wait to hear more. I left. I barely made it down the driveway before the car stalled. Of course it did. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape through my ribs. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I just knew I couldn't go back inside. Jeff knocked on the window. He didn't look angry or smug, just curious. Need a lift? He asked. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. We ended up at a small restaurant off the highway. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where the lights are too bright and no one asks questions. I didn't realize how much I was shaking until I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup and felt it spill over the rim. Jeff watched me quietly. Then he said, I know 3 things. I looked up. First, he said, my grandfather would never kill himself. That landed heavier than I expected. Second, he continued, you throw up when you lie. My stomach dropped. And third, he said, glancing at the empty bowl in front of me, you've already eaten. He slid the bowl closer, not threatening, just patient. Tell me what really happened. I stared at the table for a long time. I thought about my mother, about my license, about how one wrong sentence could erase everything I'd built. So I told him part of the truth. Enough to make it real, not enough to destroy me. I admitted the medication mix-up. I admitted my fear. I admitted that I stayed longer than I should have. I didn't mention the bottles, or the instructions, or the moment I realized something was already wrong before I ever touched the syringe. Jeff didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and sighed. I hate this family, he said quietly. All of them. He promised he wouldn't go to the police. Said Grandpa had made the right choice. Said if I inherited, he just wanted the share that should have been his. It sounded reasonable, too reasonable. I agreed. At the time, it felt like relief. Relief doesn't last. By the next morning, reporters were outside my place. Cameras, questions, headlines that twisted my name into something ugly and greedy. I stopped answering my phone. Nick went to see the great-grandmother. I stayed home trying not to think. That's when the letter arrived. I know what you did. Half the page was gone. The rest looked like part of a lab report. I sat on the floor holding it, my back against the wall, breathing shallow and fast. I knew what it meant. If they tested his blood again, they'd find everything. I went to Jeff. Even he didn't understand what kind of blackmail it was. No demands, no contact, just a warning. He said if the evidence disappeared, no one could prove anything. The lab burned down before we got there. That was when I realized we weren't ahead of this. We were behind. I remember the moment my stomach dropped like a stone in a pond, the air thick with smoke and that unmistakable acrid tang of burnt chemicals. The lab. My mind couldn't process it at first. Everything we thought was evidence, the tests, the notes, the results, gone, swallowed by flames. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears as Jeff muttered something about the other party already having enough evidence. My hands shook, but I forced myself to keep moving. There was a mailbox I'd remembered, half buried under leaves near the gate. The blackmailer's address was scribbled there. I had to find it, I told myself. Whoever was behind this had to meet me, and I couldn't let them wait. Nick's silhouette flickered in the distance, his sharp eyes catching ours. My heart jumped. I barely had time to think. I wanted to meet the mysterious person, to finally understand who had been watching me, why, and what they wanted. But before we could even take a step forward, sirens wailed and police cars boxed us in. I froze, expecting cuffs and questions, and then, relief, confusion, disbelief, they took Jeff instead. Not me. My mind whirled with questions. What the hell had just happened? Nick later told me what he'd learned from the great-grandmother, her frailty not stopping her from remembering details that cleared Jeff in certain ways, but made everything else even murkier. Jeff had climbed the railing that night. He was now a suspect. I was supposed to meet this mysterious figure, but the city suddenly felt smaller, every street tighter. I needed time. I told Nick I had to grab something and asked him to wait. He nodded, the calm in his face only heightening my anxiety. I entered the manor, stepped silent, trying not to betray the chaos in my mind. And then, I saw him, the butler. My chest seized. There was a bottle of morphine on the floor. He coughed, struggling to get the words out. You are the killer. You can't escape. His hands twitched uncontrollably. I froze. My training, my instincts screamed at me. But my heart refused to let me abandon him. I pulled out my phone. I called the police. It was the right thing to do. I couldn't let fear make me cruel. At the hospital, the pressure finally broke. I confessed everything to Nick. Everything I remembered. Everything I feared. But before the authorities could move, before anything official could happen, I wanted to return to the manor, to apologize, to set right whatever lingering shadows my presence had cast. Nick, quiet as ever, agreed. I thanked him for everything, even as dread coiled in my stomach. But just as I prepared to explain that night, Nick stopped me. Everyone was silent, waiting, tension hanging in the air. And then Nick cursed them all out. Every last one of them. None of them had treated me like a human being. All they cared about was the inheritance. The shock of it settled over me like a cold tide. I realized he was right. From the very beginning, every glance, every word, every scheme had been about money. Nothing else. Then he dropped the bomb. The old man's death was suicide. My stomach twisted. I had thought, no, I had feared, that my own hands had caused it. But Nick explained it wasn't that simple. The whole scenario was like a donut, he said. The medication I had almost injected filled one hole, but I had ignored what filled another. And that another opening, that was the key. I listened, my heart hammering, as Nick explained about the invitation he'd received, how someone had known the will's contents in advance, and how they had tried to manipulate everything through the killer clause. As long as the nurse was involved in the death, the will would be void. I thought immediately of the butler, but Nick shook his head. He only wanted money. That was it. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a tiny thread of relief. Then Jeff appeared. My chest tightened. Nick brought him forward, and I couldn't help it. I blurted, "You arrested the wrong person." My voice echoed in the room, all the pent-up fear and frustration pouring out. I explained what the great-grandmother had said, how she mistook me for the oldest grandson, and how Jeff had tried to manipulate the situation. He denied it, of course, but Nick cut him off, recounting every step. The argument in the study, Jeff leaving in anger, sneaking back, climbing the railing, switching the medication bottles, taking the antidote. And suddenly, it all clicked. If Jeff had succeeded, if the medication had been switched successfully, the will would have been void. I realized then the truth. The medication I had injected, the bottle I had picked up almost at random, was actually the correct one. It had been switched back without my knowledge, but somehow, instinctively, I had picked the right one anyway. My hand shook as the weight of it hit me. I had been a good nurse, even in the chaos, even under pressure, and it had saved me. Nick confirmed it. The lab report showed normal blood levels. The old man's death was indeed suicide. The newspaper had been wrong. The story about the wrong medication had been fabricated, part of Jeff's plan. He had tried to frame me, tried to take me down so he could manipulate the inheritance. And yet, I was alive, untainted. Jeff had thought I'd panic if I saw the morphine, that I'd be afraid to call the police. But he forgot one crucial thing. I wasn't just scared, I was kind. I acted because I had to. I saved the butler. I didn't let fear dictate my choices. And in the end, that kindness, my humanity, was exactly what the old man had valued most. Jeff's voice changed the moment he realized the butler might wake up. It wasn't anger anymore. It was panic, raw and exposed. I could hear him breathing hard on the other end of the line, like someone cornered who suddenly understands how close the walls are. "If she wakes up, I'm finished," he said. Then he paused. And when he spoke again, his tone shifted, slower, colder. "But if she lives, I'll be fine." My stomach dropped. That was when he stopped pretending. He told me everything like it was nothing more than a business decision. He said the family had been good to me after I arrived, that I should understand loyalty. He said if I were in his position, I'd protect my family's inheritance too. His words crawled under my skin. I did try to kill the butler, he admitted casually, like he was talking about scratching a car. I needed someone to take the fall. You were perfect, but she's still alive. So if you insist on keeping the inheritance, he laughed softly, I'll make you pay when I get out. I didn't plan it. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. The nausea that had been building for days finally won, and I threw up right there, all over him. I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't even feel sorry. I felt empty. And then I lied. I told him the hospital had called again. I told him the butler didn't make it. I watched his face change in real time, from confidence to shock, to something like fear. He didn't realize what he'd just done. He didn't realize the room was being recorded. He didn't realize he had confessed to everything out loud. When the police stepped in, it happened fast. Jeff was taken away before he could say another word. The same people who had defended him hours earlier suddenly couldn't even meet his eyes. The man everyone called the gold digger tried to interfere, tried to pressure the police, tried to make it all disappear, but he didn't know something important. His wife had already found her father's letter. Grandpa had used a private encryption method only she knew. And because of the prenup, the man wouldn't get a single cent. Not now. Not ever. Later, Nick told me the truth he'd never said out loud before. From the moment he saw me, he knew I was involved. He noticed the blood on my shoes that night. He watched how I reacted, how I spoke, how I hesitated. But the more he investigated, the more he realized something didn't add up. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't chaos. It was design. The old man had arranged everything. Not to punish anyone, not to reward greed, but to see who would act with kindness when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. Nick said the old man believed money had poisoned his family long before any medication ever could. He believed that without inheritance to fight over, they might finally learn how to live like human beings again. I didn't know how to feel hearing that. Relief, sadness, a quiet kind of anger, maybe all of it at once. That night, alone in the kitchen, I wrapped my hands around my mug, the same one I'd used every morning since I started working there. I hadn't noticed the words before, not really. I stared at it for a long time, and for the first time since all of this began, my hands finally stopped shaking. Even after all the chaos had settled, the world didn't feel entirely quiet. Jeff was sentenced to life in prison, and every time I think about him, about the lies, the threats, the betrayal, I can't help but shiver at how close it all came to destroying me. The old man's intentions, his careful planning, his subtle lessons, they only truly made sense once the dust had settled. I went back to the manor one last time. Not for the money, not for the inheritance, but to say goodbye. To see the place that had been a stage for so much greed and so much fear. Walking through the halls, I felt the echoes of arguments, of whispered threats, of the silent calculations that everyone had been making, and I realized just how fragile trust is when money is involved. Nick had been right all along. Everything had hinged on kindness, not skill, not money, not cleverness. My actions that night, simple and human as they were, had been enough to tip the balance. The old man valued that more than anything else, more than the wealth, more than the family drama, more than vengeance. I kept my job at the hospital, quietly returning to the routines that reminded me of who I was before the chaos started, before the inheritance and the threats had made me doubt myself at every turn. The family? They eventually dispersed, whispering about the scandal but never daring to step back into the manor again. The gold digger tried to make moves, tried to twist the law, but her husband's prenup and the father's letter ensured she got nothing, leaving her with only bitter regrets. And me? I kept the mug I'd been given long ago, my house, my rules, my coffee, as a reminder. It became more than a mug. It became a mantra, a small anchor in a world that had tried to drown me in fear, suspicion, and greed. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't pretend to. But the lessons linger. Kindness has weight. Honesty has power. And sometimes the quietest choices, the ones that feel small, almost insignificant, can change everything. Jeff's name will always be tied to this story, locked behind bars for the rest of his life, a reminder that cruelty has consequences, and that justice, though messy and slow, finds a way. And me? I finally sleep at night without flinching, knowing that I survived it all, not because I was clever, but because I stayed human when it mattered most. The end. Thank you for watching. Please hit subscribe and like if you like these videos.